The Solar Podcast is brought to you by Continental Energy Solutions. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Today, distributed utility scale solar and storage. My guest today is Jesse Grossman, the CEO of Soltage. Welcome to the show, Jesse.
Hi, Tim. Very glad to be with you here today.
I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time. I really appreciate you coming on the show. We got to know Soltage when the Illinois boom happened back in 2017, right? And you guys hired Jonathan Roberts, who is a wonderful asset for you and a wonderful friend of ours. But you are a very well-established distributed and community solar developer there on the East Coast. We would love to hear a little bit about your background, and then you and I are going to break down what's going on in the world of distributed utility solar and storage. But first, give us a little background on yourself. How did you get so interested in renewables?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Sam. And thanks for the intro, and thanks for your attention to this industry and the coverage you do through this podcast. It's really great to shine a light on various parts of the industry as you do. So let's see, going back, started Soltage, 15 years ago, and we'll talk about what Soltage does. But to your background question, like most of us that have been in the industry for a long time, we've had, at least one or two past lives. My past life, I was a scientist, and I guess I'm still a scientist. I thought at one point I wanted to be a doctor, and then realized how long I'd have to be in school to actually start practicing. And so I started doing tropical rainforest ecology and the biology side of science, conservation as well, and spent, got some degrees in that, and spent many years in very interesting parts of the world that have the interesting, megafauna and interesting ecosystems that have high conservation priorities. So a lot of time in Southeast Asia, a lot of time in East Africa, as well as some parts of Central America. And it was great work. It was very joyful, soulful work, going and creating good conservation questions, putting good science behind solutions to either justify the existence of ecosystems, understand better, where rare and endangered species are, understand how humans and our natural world are coexisting or not. While I was doing that over the years, money for those organizations, running larger projects, started to see a trend. And that trend was business interests were going into those areas, and whether they wanted to take the lumber out of the forest, whether they wanted to take the coal from the coal seams below, a very rare and endangered ecosystem. Those interests were winning out. It didn't matter how good of a scientific project we could put together and the data that we could show. Those business interests were winning out to give societies what they needed locally or on a national level to move forward, be it lumber or materials, minerals, something like that. So from a macro perspective, I said, if I'm working from the conservation biology, NGO, government organizational side, I'm going to be very frustrated because a lot of my interests I'm not going to see achieved, and I need to, do something on the business side and launch a business that's a good substitute. Humans need food, water, electricity, and my thought at the time was, if we're able to figure out some way to provision those resources in a more sustainable manner, sort of by default, the conservation points, the sustainability points that I was interested in pushing forward with my energy would be achieved. And so went back to grad school, and the renewable energy market and the carbon markets at the time, this was back in 2004, 2005, were post Kyoto, very interesting. Renewable energy market in the US was really starting to take off nascent. Sort of ran both of those as potential options for where to start a business. And with a team of folks out of grad school, came upon the idea of Soltage, and we really workshopped it, developed it, and launched it. And that gets into the next 15 years, so 16 years, bringing us to where we are today.
Very good. Well, you're a man after my own heart. I'm an ecologist by training as well. I like to say that I went to college for way too long, doing important things, but things that ultimately didn't capture my interest. I'm much more interested in the green economy than in studying plants and animals. And I also like to say that plants are, I was a botanist, a forest ecologist. It's very hard to study plants because you can't talk to them. Humans are much easier to interact with because we speak the same language, generally speaking. So that's cool. I did not know that about you. And so give us the arc of Soltage from where you were, in '05. Obviously, the US solar market really took off in 2010 or 2011. So you were a very early adopter. Was there some major pain that you went through in those early years? Because there might have been some heavy lifting. And now, obviously, we are also off to the races. So it's a rocket ship ride. It's the opposite problem. And I'd love to hear how you're managing that growth.
Sure. Well, first off, appreciate learning a little bit more about you and the ecology science side. We'll have to connect offline around that, and that's very interesting. It's always nice to hear about the backstories of folks in this industry. Yeah, absolutely, it's very different ecosystem environment to do the work in back in 2005, 2006. Back at this time, 50 kW, 100 kW was a large project. I remember the first, 100 kW project, folks in New Jersey, folks were driving from states away to go take a look at it, just because it was so interesting and so novel. And it's nice to harken back to that time when now we're talking, hundreds of megawatts and gigawatts as a market. I think the US market at the time was 200 megawatts installed capacity in total. And certainly, from then to now, there have been a lot of positive changes, but they have not come without their challenges and without their, the battle wounds that you get from pushing an industry forward, which we're glad to be a part of. The big things that have happened have really, I think, been an understanding, a perception, an acknowledgement, and an ability to underwrite risk and really understand what the risk points are in this space. And that's evolved as the technology has advanced, as the contracting structures have advanced, as the investment desires have advanced, and our understanding about sort of the overall, where the power sector is going, how the last generation of power sector is aging through our economy, and where we've been setting targets for the future relative to low carbon economy and climate change. So those have all been very interesting patterns and trends to watch. Relative to the thesis behind why we started a distributed renewable energy IPP, the base of that has stayed relatively constant. And the core thesis is kilowatt hours are a valuable commodity that is purchased by any power user across the US and across the world. Fungible commodity. So you've got a good base product that you're producing. Now, renewable energy technology, back at the time it was unproven and very expensive. It's now more proven and slightly less expensive, but still far too costly to expect the end user to purchase and be able to scale that as an industry. The notion of hospitals and municipalities and large businesses, owning, operating, developing, designing, financing these non-core assets and being able to scale that as an industry just seemed to be something that didn't make any sense. And so really required a third party to be owning those assets. And so, we started as a developer, developing assets. Back at the time, it was a lot of rooftop assets, and then started to migrate to ground-mounted renewable assets, solar assets, as the regulations allowed for it. And that was a real value add in the industry. The other thing that we very quickly realized was that we had to control the financing of these assets and control the capital formation and capital stack behind these assets so that we could really guarantee the ability to build these assets when we wanted and deliver the product to the clients, kilowatt hours, on-site solar, et cetera, in a format that was commercially reasonable and that they would expect from a business perspective. So you fast forward that, to the future in terms of where we are now and what we've been doing. We amassed a good portfolio of solar assets on the East Coast, and then now we're a very national company. Over time, we started ring fencing our own capital vehicles, raising our private capital vehicles, initially just to deploy to our own pipeline of assets. And then over the last 5 years or so, raising those at greater scales so that we can fund our assets. And we can also fund development partner assets as well and put those into a stable capital vehicle. So we now own and operate in the distributed utility space, which is 2 to 20 megawatts of solar. We own and operate almost 400 megawatts of solar assets. We've put around $1 billion of new capital into the solar infrastructure asset class. And we've just closed our 8th capital vehicle, which is another $250 million commitment from an open-ended fund, Harrison Street Capital. And they're proving to be excellent partners, as have all of the institutional partners that we've worked with in the past.
Well, that's quite a journey from 0 to 350 megawatts, and now this new injection of 250 million. That gives you quite a bit of runway. You could, what, double your assets under management, it looks like, right?
Certainly. And, you know, we just have to keep pace with the speed of our pipeline, the speed of our development, and really, frankly, what this country needs.
Yeah. With so many markets that are hot solar markets, how do you guys, figure out where you're going to shine a light? I don't imagine that's an easy problem these days.
Well, it's the complexity is the challenge of this business. As we all know, there's not a whole lot of specific IP in this business. And what it is about setting up a real clean, transparent business model and executing on that. And it is the execution that, which is where we spend most of our time, certainly on the management side. Early on, we built out the thesis that a diversified portfolio of distributed utility assets is going to be very valuable to investors that are looking for a multi-state distributed portfolio, where you have a lot of access to various markets. You don't have a concentration risk to any one region, any one weather regime, any one regulatory regime. And so we've always wanted to have our feet in a number of solar markets. I think at present we're in 16 solar states. And what we do is, it's relatively boring, but we try to keep a real high level of discipline of having a micro business plan for each state. And so as developers and originators on our team, think about good ideas, a 50 megawatt business model they'd like to expand in one state, 100 megawatt, customer facing model they'd like to expand across a region. They write it down on paper, we vet it, we try to pick holes in it at the investment committee level. And if it makes sense, we fund it. And we fund it with an expectation that so many projects, so many megawatts will be delivered in so much time. And, talking it through, it sounds relatively straightforward. But what this wraps in is RPS standards on a state level, interconnection policies on a state level, how you're going to sell the power. Is it going to be community solar? Is it going to be PERPA? Is it going to be direct with corporates or municipalities? Is it going to be residential, some sort of a residential strategy that you're playing out? And then, what is the construction environment? What is the labor environment in those markets? And so, what it ends up with is, we're doing a close into our permanent capital vehicle, maybe every quarter or maybe 2 a quarter. And we drop in, 30, 40 megawatts across 5 or 6 projects, diversified solar assets across a number of states. And those build up into our permanent capital vehicle into hundreds of megawatts. And those hundreds of megawatts are made up of 2 to 20 megawatt projects across the US. And they're all producing good cash flows. And they hold up as a very robust portfolio of cash flows, which is exactly the sort of financial product that we look to put together. Performs very well. During the last year in particular, that was stressed as a number of asset classes were stressed during the COVID pandemic, where parts of the economy, certainly shut down. But one of the things that we always held to be true, although we wouldn't have wanted to have it proved out in such a dramatic fashion, is that creditworthy entities continue to pay their power bills. And we saw, excellent payments across the portfolio, and real good metrics in terms of what we were hoping to happen in some of the worst economic conditions we've seen in a while.
Yeah, I mean, when the COVID epidemic hit, of course, there was a bump in the road for construction, but we pretty much got back to business as usual pretty quickly. Last year was a banner year for us here in Illinois, as you
Yeah.
know, with this pulse of community solar projects, especially getting built. And it is a boom and a bust, unfortunately, in Illinois, where there is a glimmer of hope now with the Consumers and Climate First Act of Governor Pritzker's, which interestingly, throws some twists into the community solar market or the future of the community solar market here. We had a 2 megawatt AC, 3 megawatt DC market, and now that could change to upwards of 10 megawatts. So that's kind of exciting. And we're looking forward to seeing the next wave, so to speak, hit here in Illinois. But every region has this boom and bust. You can almost think of it as waves hitting a shoreline, right? And right now, New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts and Maine and Virginia and the Carolinas are undergoing booms. These are not the first booms for many of those places. It is the first for states like Maine. And there you are. I imagine you're working in all of those markets that I just named. I would be surprised if you're not. But I'm glad you mentioned the pandemic. The other good news is that everybody needs KWH, right? No matter what's going on, we need electricity day in and day out. And so it's quite unusual for people not to pay their power bill. There has to be really significant distress going on for a company or even an individual, right, to not pay their power bill. Something is very, very wrong there. But how did you guys weather the COVID epidemic?
Yeah. Well, it was a trying time, nationally, folks were affected personally, across, the industry and certainly in our staff. And thankfully, we've been in this space for a while, been running a business for a while. And so we're able to pull on the lessons of past, recessions. We were operating the business through the 2008 recession. Although something that had some biological factors of this nature, I don't think any of us have seen in our lifetimes. There was a lot of new learnings and reactions that had to happen. So, the first thing we did, I think, was a responsible step that most businesses took was, to ensure staff, customers, we're all safe and stable, working from home, et cetera. Business continuity checklist was the next thing that we went to from a safety, regulatory, make sure communication matters were happening internally as well as up and down the capital stack with our investors and with our clients. And then we looked at, how do we make sure our business is stabilized and growing? Because, as you pointed out, the tailwinds continued through 2020 in terms of customer demand and in terms of, the regulatory push and the state RPS goals that needed to be met. So, thankfully, when the federal and state governments established our industry as essential, we were able to work with our subcontractors to continue to execute on those projects. I think we had 100 megawatts under construction going into the pandemic across 6 or 7 states. And so, there was a lot of different checking on various state regulatory designation and things like that. Some states were ahead of other states with that. We were also doing, some capital raises. We were raising our 8th funds during that COVID period. And so all of the, plane trips and in-person meetings for road shows in Asia and Europe and across the US, all of those were shelved, and everybody figured out what, Zoom and the feature, the video feature on Microsoft Teams could do. And thankfully, with broadband across the country and the world, in many of the business centers, we were able to keep that moving without skipping a beat. And frankly, in many cases, it was far more efficient than being on a plane for 12 hours to get to one meeting. And hopefully a lot of those things will persist, where you can continue to do in-person meetings, but through Zoom from the efficiency and convenience of your own desk. So we were, pleased as well. I'd share your statement. It was a banner year. We got another 150 megawatts or so, into construction and or commissioned. And we were able to do our part with keeping the economy rolling and meeting the new clean energy goals of the time.
As we come out of the epidemic now, here in May of 2021. Things are really looking up here in the US. We're not done with it globally, of course, and
Yeah.
there will probably be subsequent waves, but for now, things look pretty good. People are getting back to ordinary life. I'm in the office today, which is unusual. And so that is good to get back to business as usual. So what do you see as the biggest economic opportunities, though, as the United States comes out of this? And it's a both and, where we're coming out of the epidemic. We have a new administration in Washington, which has some lofty goals around clean energy and the energy transition and electrification of transportation. What is in your crystal ball, and what are you focusing on?
Yeah, well, Tim, that's a great question, and I'm glad that we're at that section, because I think a strategic optimist by by nature, which means I'm always kind of looking around the corner for what shoe is going to drop, where are we going to have issues, and we do have those, and we can talk about those, but the tailwinds for this sector, coming out of the pandemic and with the new administration, are as strong as I've seen them, in the last 15 years. And there's a real level of stability, during the last federal government. This industry did not, we were dampened a little bit in terms of our momentum, but it did not slow us down. So I feel like the book that is being written on, on the clean energy transformation, on the low carbon infrastructure that we need for the next couple of generations to power this country, that book is written, and the pages are getting turned relatively quickly at this point. In terms of digging into some specifics, customer demand, procurement demand for clean energy and renewable energy certificates, or the attributes of clean energy, that trend is going up into the right very dramatically from all parties, right? Residential entities are looking for clean energy, municipalities at large are looking for clean energy, utilities and their IRPs are all looking for massive new construction, both that they're owning and that are being owned by third parties. Corporate purchasing, it's not only the Fortune 50s, but now the Fortune 500 and the Fortune 2000 are all, responding to internal ESG mandates, to shareholder, to boardroom demands that they're procuring renewable, not only because it's green, and certainly not primarily because it's green, because it's a good economic move. The reality of solar energy and wind and other clean energy products is that you can achieve a win-win. You can do the right thing, for the country, for the economy, for job creation, as well as having, reduced price and fixed price power out to the future if you're negotiating correctly. So that's good. The demand is off the charts. Also, you've got the demand pull. You've also got the regulatory push right now, which is great. We've got 100 million folks living in 100% RPS states at present. So the RPS state push has been significant. And we can't understate that. That has really galvanized, the regulators to put in place the right sort of market signals for the development of clean energy products. So that's there. At the federal level, we're getting some really excellent signals with the Biden administration bill and the Clean Jobs Act and things of that nature. But this is a multi-trillion-dollar, multi-pronged approach to infrastructure investment, and a number of those benefits are landing square in the middle of what this industry needs and understands and has worked with for many years from an investment perspective. The ITC, is very likely to go back up to 30% and to be extended out into the future. There's a positive talk about some refundability of the ITC, either at 85% or 100%, and that could take out some of the friction and sand in the gears as it relates to the financing of this asset class and the utilization of tax equity. There's some thoughts about standalone storage ITC, which would be a real boon and a very important, I think, move for the federal government to take in terms of allowing for storage to be placed and have positive economics at more critical points across the infrastructure. And then I'm really excited about the transmission and distribution committees that are being set up to understand where we need to be moving power in this country from renewable resources to demand centers in an efficient way. and to be putting strong market signals and investment incentives behind that asset class, such that developers at large who are quite good at developing at this point distributed energy assets can start to think about where there might be substation, distribution, transmission lines that need to be created and why, and how to put a good investment thesis around that. Finally, the last 2 points: prices have gone down and are continuing to go down, both hard costs and soft costs, and as interest rates have been near zero, as solar has been recognized as a very low risk, stable, boring asset class. Dollars have just been flowing into this sector. The metaphors are numerous. Is it a wave, a tidal wave, a tsunami of dollars coming into this space? But it's true, and it's institutional investment looking for high quality investment products that they can put their that they can put their cash and their customers' cash in, that will be generating stable returns for the next 40, 50 years, which is exactly what this sector can do.
That's a lovely statement. 100 million people in 100% RPS states. That's a third of the United States now living in 100% RPS states. My own state of Illinois is soon to be in that category. We have an 100% RPS on the books. It just hasn't become law yet. So, but that's clear that Governor Pritzker is making that a priority. So I'm looking forward to that day. It's almost a must do if you're a governor or a mayor to start chasing 100% RPS if you haven't done that already. So many states have gone there. So it really is a new day in the United States in that regard. And I'm glad you mentioned the potential for a transmission ITC. We need to reimagine and rebuild the grid, and solar and storage can be really good for the grid and a good combination. And we just need to modernize the grid so that the grid operators can make it easier to develop projects, right? That is a point of serious friction for solar developers, both in the distributed and the community solar arenas, not to mention utility scale. So really looking forward to seeing how that unfolds. And yes, there is a tidal wave of money flowing into clean energy globally. Almost every day I get approached on LinkedIn by asset owners and financiers who are looking to invest in renewables projects. So I like to say there's more money than there are projects. We need to step on the gas on the project side and start building more solar. And, with the 2035 report and, so many similar reports, we clearly see now that we can achieve 100% clean grid by 2035, but we have to build 70 gigawatts of wind and solar per year for the next 15 years. And, that is a major uptick. So hold on, because it's going to be a rocket ship one way or another. What state level policies across the United States are you guys paying attention to right now and getting excited about?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As we continue to add DG and utility scale assets across the U.S. and additional infrastructure across the board, the state level, the states are going to be where a lot of the important decisions are made and where a lot of the important markets are opened. I think the states, are by and large creating the regulatory environment for interconnection and policy creation. Both of those need careful attention. This is not a flashy part of the industry. This is not a super exciting part of the industry, but this is the detailed part of the industry and the complexity that needs to be figured out to allow this country to get to 100% renewable by 2035. So, state level policies are simple and, as simple as, how do we tax solar? How do we allow for sort of normalized interconnections across the state, below a certain level when it's not going to the ISO or RTO level? How do we, allow for the communities in which solar is being placed to benefit from the solar resources that are being put there? we've seen a lot of issues over the years in two fronts. One is, solar sounds good if it's marketed well. It's like, who doesn't like puppies and children and flowers, to be put in a landscape. It's clean, it doesn't make any noise, it doesn't move. You don't have to add to the burdens on the roads, you don't have to add to schools, and it's giving electricity, something everybody needs. But then, sometimes there's improper communication between developers that are going into a region and the local communities. And sometimes, frankly, the solar is not scaled appropriately for where it's trying to be dropped in. So we've seen pushback, we've seen moratoriums in permitting, we've seen communities kind of get up in arms and say, we don't want any more solar here, or there's enough solar. We need to preserve our farmland, we need to preserve our forests, we need to preserve open spaces, things of that nature. And so, on the state level, there's a lot of communication that needs to be done in terms of how to map the 100% clean energy policies into the on-the-ground realities. And, I always like top-down thinking, set up a state-level task force that looks at what are the critical, points in terms of, the states that they're watching, what are their communities going to be watching, and then where does that allow for solar, for wind, for storage, for hydro, geothermal, et cetera, to be appropriately placed. The other issue that we've seen, and this has to be dealt with on a utility level, on a state level, and on a federal level, is interconnection. As many of the developers that I'm sure are listening to your podcast are aware, and I think you alluded to it, a lot of interconnection for DG interconnection is blown out currently in a lot of state markets, right? Where you say, good luck getting a 5 megawatt asset interconnected in this part of, pick your utility. There's going to be a transmission study, you're talking about 18 months and it's probably not going to happen. And so, you see those in states that have had, quite a bit of time in terms of solar market. They might have a couple megawatts or a gigawatt of solar on their grid. But how do we add, all of those annual gigawatts to get to 100% clean energy by 2030? We need local investments in transmission and distribution. We need storage to be put in there. And we need to allow for the interconnection of solar assets in markets where currently it's very difficult. So that's one of the big bottlenecks I'm seeing. Local labor markets are going to be important as well. So we need to make sure that we have enough local labor who is skilled and trained to install the infrastructure, the crush of infrastructure that we need to put in over the next 15 years by 2035 to get there. Because as you said, we got to strap in and gird up, because it's a lot of construction, a lot of complexity that we're going to have to work through, and we got to do it very intelligently over the next 15 years.
Yeah, we're just at 20 gigawatts a year in the US now. We passed that mark last year. So we truly need to double the rate of installation. Let's talk a little bit about solar and storage alone.
Yeah.
As our listeners know, storage is totally essential. It's the bee's knees of renewable energy, because renewable assets are intermittent by nature. And storage then gives you shoulders. It also provides a value stack, frequency regulation, resiliency, things that solar alone just can't do. So it's a wonderful toolkit. And, as Elon Musk likes to point out, we need a battery 1 mile square to completely green the grid in the United States. It's just totally doable.
Yeah.
But we have to do it. And you are one of the developers that is doing solar and storage, and I think now storage alone. So talk about that landscape, how you see that, and where are you getting traction?
Yeah, no, it's a great pivot, Sam. I'm glad to talk about storage for a while. As you said, this is going to be a very important component of our clean energy economy going forward. I think, like many other IPPs and asset owners, we started to review storage and get into storage, as coupled with solar. And there was a couple of markets that provided, at least on the DG side, investment in incentives to allow for storage to be profitable, because it is, relatively expensive. Costs are going down at a good year-over-year clip, but certainly for the last couple of years, it's been expensive enough to be uneconomic without subsidies. And so California with some of their programs, Massachusetts with some of their programs really provided some of the training wheels to allow for solar plus storage to get moving. New York threw some good incentives in there as well. And the business case, one can argue, does it make sense to pair solar with storage? And then what kind of storage? And I think, we could certainly go down a rabbit hole on that. Where we are most excited and where I'd like to spend a bit of time talking is about standalone storage. Standalone storage, we feel there's a very clear economic business case for that in various markets. The footprint and power density is shockingly small if you're used to 40-acre solar farms, 50-acre solar farms, 100-acre solar farms. You have the same power density, same investment, on a 20 by 100, city block, which is a city lot, which is really great. And there's enough, I'd say, new revenue models coming out that this really does feel like where solar was, 8 to 10 years ago, where, there's no normalized or Catholic business model for how you roll this out. And at this point, the industry is, I think, limited by our intelligence in how we interact with the current grid environment and structure revenue contracts with the technology available to us. Storage is going to be very important, particularly to provide stability into some of the sort of lighter infrastructure areas across the country and to stabilize those as we're building out more infrastructure. Also, an area that we're very excited about is urban centers, where you're seeing a lot of power plant retirement feeding urban centers, and you're not going to get a new natural gas plant permitted, certainly not going to get a new coal plant permitted. And so, what are your options there? Transmission constraints is often the case with a lot of cities, particularly coastal. And so if you're not able to really efficiently get more megawatts and you're losing megawatts, you're sort of shedding capacity in the local grids, storage is going to be your only option. And, a number of the utilities, Con Ed and others have been coming out with pretty interesting revenue models where you can get paid for, not only the electricity you're putting on at various hours, but also capacity, reserves, and other economic points, such that you can start to structure a contracted set of cash flows going out to the future that you can underwrite from an institutional perspective, that have good credit, and that you can raise debt against. Now, all of this is in its relatively early stages of being rolled out, but it's coming. I think it'll come faster than anyone's expecting, and it needs to happen because fundamentally, the demand in city centers is not going down. Here in America, we expect that we're able to turn on the lights and there's not a brownout situation, and we can get as big of a TV as we want in our facilities, for better or worse. And we on the development side, on the infrastructure investment side, as a community, we need to be developing those projects, both on the capacity side and the storage side, to support that continued reality.
You mentioned California. We have incentives in Massachusetts. I think NYSERDA is working on a solar and storage incentive. So, but as far as storage alone, how do you target markets? Are you looking to these utility RFPs? I mean, I can't keep track of all of the utility RFPs now, like NIPSCO in Indiana, right? This is a largely gas utility, but they also own coal assets. Yep. And they are just sweeping away their fossil assets and replacing them with wind, solar, and storage. I also saw an analysis recently that 80% of the coal plants in the US are not economically viable, meaning that those asset owners can do better financially by shuttering those facilities and transitioning to clean energy. And that is just putting more wind at our backs. So when you think about storage alone, though, are you thinking about like 5 and 10 megawatt facilities, or what scale are we talking?
Yeah, from our perspective, we're doing a lot of, 2 to 10 megawatt facilities that we're developing in our pipeline with around 4 megawatt hours of storage in each one of those. And, we're currently using sort of lithium ion because, that's the dominant technology that's following the EV market and the rollout of battery factories for that. But there's a lot of sort of long duration storage, flow batteries and the type, which are very interesting and probably line up a little bit better if they can be commercialized with the long-term needs in this space. In terms of where the implementation models are, they're across the country, and from our perspective, it's the same sort of discipline of how we get into various states and markets, where internally we're writing up micro business plans for where are we going to deploy storage. What are the risks to doing that? What's the development pathway? What are the revenues? What are the ultimate returns and investment that we're going to need to make to bring those assets through? And we do that on a market by market basis, whether we're looking at an urban center or looking at a utility solicitation that we're expecting to come out, or whether we're just responding to RFPs coming out from utilities, municipalities, and co-ops, things of that nature, which are all integrating some level of storage right now. So it's a little bit of an exciting time. I'd say it's a little bit of a Wild West time for making investments and needing to keep prudent discipline in terms of how you are lining up what you are telling your clients, what you're telling your investment partners that you can do, and needing to pull those through. And I think that we're going to see a lot more solid patterns of how best practices are established coming through over the next 24 to 36 months here, Tim.
Well, in our closing minutes, Jesse, what other trends are you keeping an eye on, say for the next 5 years? What are you thinking about?
Yeah. Yep. So, very excited about a couple of things. Number one, I think as we see first the challenges, right? What are going to be the challenges to the implementation of 100% clean energy in this country by 2035? To my mind, there's 3 primary things. The first is, interconnection and some of the transmission issues that we've been talking about. If we're currently deploying 20 gigawatts a year as a country, and we need to get to 70 gigawatts a year, we need to be addressing those as one of the primary challenges in a very proactive way. How do we create good investment models to put interconnect transmission and distribution down to local substation level to be able to interconnect all of the clean energy we need to in this country? And it needs to be a real collected, concerted effort, in a way that we haven't done infrastructure investment in the US, in 40, 50 years since we last built out, the last spate of large generation assets. And some could argue, go all the way back to CCC when we built out, the roads and the railroads, across this country to fuel our last, sustained economic boom coming out of the world wars. So I think, we are very much in that mindset in terms of infrastructure creation. And thankfully, we're seeing some of the funding to come behind it, but it's going to be a lot of execution and clean execution and complexity. The other 2 things are bottlenecks in both labor and equipment that we need to watch out for. As we are ramping up, as we are, the global markets for the built products, the racking, the panels, we're going to have to be watching that very closely. Right now we're in a commodity price increase cycle and potentially an inflationary cycle as well. And so, the availability of resources that we need to be building solar assets is something that we're looking very closely at and going to keep a watch on over the next 5 years, as well as local labor availability. If we are looking to build, a couple hundred megawatts a year across a couple of different markets, who are the EPCs that are going to be able to build that? Who are they working with from a subcontractor perspective? We've talked quite a bit, over the last couple of years as an industry about the solar jobs boom and the hundreds of thousands of Americans that we are employing as an industry. That is going to continue to be important to sustainably grow that into the numbers that we need to build out what we've got. So those are some of the challenges. The exciting trends that we're keeping a watch on. We've talked quite a bit about that, and the other side of the challenges are the opportunities. We're seeing more local thoughts on manufacturing, which is very interesting, be it batteries, racking, any of the primary components going into this space. And finally, the other, I had one other thing, Tim, and I lost it.
Oh, no worries.
It'll come back to me. It seemed like you had something.
Let's talk about job creation
Yeah.
and the labor force, because I think this is a very important thing for everybody, whether you're already in the energy industry or you're aspiring to get into the energy industry. We need tens of thousands of more people to come into the industry at all levels, whether you're interested in a college track or a trade track. It's a both and world. We need literally just tens and tens of thousands of people, passionate, smart, ambitious, and it's a win-win, because not only are they guaranteed a wonderful career for the next 50 years, but they're going to be making the world a better place for future generations, being part of this energy transition that is so essential. Science understands now that we have to do this so that we don't have just radical climate chaos knocking us about. Humans will survive climate chaos, but if you could have a smoother ride, you want to do that, right? And so I think the Consumer and Climate First Act is a good example of that here in Illinois. There is a strong emphasis on a just transition, right? As I said, 80% of coal power plants are non-economic. Those jobs are going to go away, like it or not. There's just no way to stop that happening, right? And so if you work in a coal plant, there's no reason why you can't work in a solar field or a battery farm, or for the companies that are developing those projects and maintaining them. So let's get out of this place of fear of, oh my God, we're going to lose thousands of jobs. No, we're going to create millions of jobs in a much cleaner and safer economy. And of course, that takes training. And so, we need to put money into things like community college, right, to give access. And it's wonderful to see the Biden administration shining a light on this and making higher ed accessible, because it truly is not accessible to most Americans today. 50% of our population just cannot afford it outright. And only about a third of the population is considering higher education.
Mm.
So there's that. And, the folks like yourselves at Soltage, right? You're ahead of the game. You're skating to where the puck is going. You completely understand the economic opportunity, but you're only going to be able to achieve your goal if the rest of society gets on board, right? And gets on the bus with you. So I don't know, do you have any favorite places where they're doing this right?
Well, I think you captured a very important point there, Tim, in terms of labor force needs to be there, and we need to be allowing for folks to train themselves or transition careers to get into this space. One of the things that I like about this space is it's so multidisciplinary. There's technical jobs that are being created and will be here in this country for the next 50 years. There's financial jobs that are being created, will be here and will be here for the next 50 years. There's customer service and sales jobs that will be here and will be here for the next 50 years. There's a lot of software development that's going on in terms of how to manage inverters, how to manage batteries, how to manage fleets of assets across regions, across ISOs, to be managing capacity, storage discharge, and other things like that. And so, regardless of where your interest is from a trade perspective, you can find a good home in the renewables industry. And I think that's something that's very important and exciting. And I recall that thread, which is is a good place to go next that I was thinking about, which are things that are coming down the pike quickly and we're excited about, and that's the electrification of vehicles, of built systems, etc. Where as we're transitioning away from fossil fuels and even natural gas, we're going to require a lot more electricity fundamentally, and so electrifying buildings, the EV vehicle fleets, setting up charge point stations across the country. That's going to be another real strong multi-billion-dollar a year sort of investment asset class to either invest in or work in. That's something very exciting.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned the electrification of transportation. We're going to triple the grid. We need a lot more kilowatt hours. The utilities can relax about DG. They're going to keep selling plenty of power, and they're going to be owning lots of clean energy assets themselves, making the kWh with wind, solar, and storage. So I say, let's get on with it. I need to make a couple of announcements, and then we'll let our listeners know how they can reach you, Jesse. We are doing these interviews twice a week, and you can find all of this content at cesnrg.com/podcast. I think we lost Jesse's video. Oh, there he is. Okay. And we're bringing you interviews with thought leaders like David Loomis, who's done many economic reports on wind, solar, and storage facilities. He has a great report out that we talk about on the Path to 100, which is one of the pieces of clean legislation here in Illinois, talking about grid interactive buildings, talk about electrification of our buildings, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning is getting electrified en masse. And then we bring you tools and technology like rooftop storage with the CEO of Yada Energy, Omid Batkube, great technology for rooftop storage, and then siting tools like Pivot and Rich Henry at Intelligent Project Siting. So check us out at cesnrg.com/podcast. Please subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and please reach out to me. I love hearing from my listeners, and I need your ideas. I'm one guy, so please tell me what you want to hear about. And if you want to be a guest, please just reach out to me, or if you have a guest idea. I want to thank Jesse Grossman, the CEO of Soltage, for coming on the show today. What a wonderful conversation this has been. I could go on for hours, Jesse. So how can our listeners reach you?
Our website is www.soltage.com. We've got Twitter, LinkedIn, I think most social media we're on. And if you want to shoot us an email, info@soltage.com. We look forward to hearing from you, whether it's to buy clean energy, think about getting your business, municipality, or utility in touch with clean energy, or whether you're a developer and you'd like to be working with a group like Soltage. We look forward to hearing from you.
Let's grow solar and storage. Thank you so much, everybody.